Hi, everyone. Welcome. We're being joined by our esteemed artists and guest speakers. Many of us are in New York and some of us are further afield, but it feels like we're all here together. So we're just going to take a second to let everybody join in. Welcome, welcome. Thank you for joining us. I'm Nova Benway. My pronouns are she, her, hers. I'm the director of Triangle, a residency program for visual artists located in Dumbo, Brooklyn. We were founded by artists in 1982, and it's been our vision ever since to provide a life-changing working environment for committed artists through studio-based opportunities to experiment and create new work, and the introduction of that work to new audiences with public programs like this Open Studios. Before we begin, I want to note that this event is being recorded. Closed captions are available. Participants must have the closed captions button turned on in order to set up or view captions in Zoom events. This setting is turned on by default for all Zoom users, and it can be found in My Account, Settings, in Meeting. And we've posted this information in the chat as well. If you need assistance during this event, chat directly to Tiffany Shin, the Triangle Office and Studio Manager. To begin, we respectfully acknowledge and honor that the Triangle Studios are located on the unceded lands of the Lenape and Canarsie people who have stewarded this land for generations. To this land acknowledgement, I think it's important to add a virtual land recognition, drawn actually from one of the foundations that supports Triangle, the Rubin Foundation, which has been doing a lot of important work around these issues, particularly in virtual space. These words are in turn based on language devised by Jill Carter, a professor in the Indigenous Studies and Drama, Theater, and Performance Studies Department at the University of Toronto. Carter writes, Zoom has erected its headquarters in San Jose, California, which is traditional territory of the Muwekma Ohlone tribal nation. Current members of this nation are direct descendants of the many missionized tribal groups from across the region. As we all continue to connect with each other through means like Zoom, Skype, and FaceTime, we are indebted to the Muwekma Ohlone people as the lands and waters they steward now support people, pipelines, and technologies that carry our breaths, images, and words across vast distances to others. Tonight's event will be a series of 4 30-minute conversations between each artist and an invited guest of their choosing. Attendees are very welcome to introduce themselves in the chat, say hello, and post questions, which the speakers will address as time allows. And each artist will post contact info in the chat so you can reach out afterward if you would like to know more about their work. To learn more about Triangle and the artists we support, go to triangleartsnyc.org. So to begin, I'm so very happy to introduce Rebecca Levitan, artist in residence at Triangle, speaking with fellow artist Gus Wheeler.
Thank you, Nova. All right, Gus. I don't think I can hear you.
Ta-da, the mute button moved.
Great.
You can see my screen and I'm gonna start the presentation. So why don't I just start with a couple of simple words, which are Rebecca and I have known each other since well before either of us knew we were gonna be artists. It was a path we realized we were gonna walk down together partway through college. She has been a friend whose intense study and love of painting has inspired me, and our ongoing conversations have helped shape me as an artist. When we get together, everyone knows that at some point we will be sitting off to the side having a whirlwind conversation about our new favorite painters pigments, pedagogy, art world trends, and our own works and ideas. About 6 weeks ago, we were catching up on Zoom and Rebecca shared a recent thought experiment, a taxonomy of the unreal that I found really interesting and insightful. So when she asked me to do this, I thought it would be a great framework for discussing her work. So on screen, you can see just some like basic notes, bullet points of what we're gonna sort of talk about. So I guess just to start, like, tell me about why you did this.
Yeah, so I'm a painter primarily, though I make other things mostly in service of my paintings, and you're a painter as well. And generally, I think a lot about my paintings in relationship with fiction. I read a lot of fiction, and I think about like, how can you create a painting that kind of does some of the things fiction does, which is often telling stories about our contemporary moment. And I realized as I was making these paintings, I was not really interested in sort of like literally documenting the world around me in a nonfiction way. That didn't feel like that was actually getting at the stories that I wanted to tell. And so I kind of wanted to understand, like, where are these parameters of the fictions that I'm creating? I don't know. I feel like in your studio, there's like some questions that are easy to answer when you're making a painting and some that are hard. And this kept being a hard question. Like I kept having to make a decision that based on like what level and what kind of unrealism I was looking for and not being able to answer it. So I kind of wanted to dig in and figure out like where I stood and what kinds of unrealism there was. Also, I know we've talked about this a bit too, like you're making art and you suddenly see that there's a lot of art that maybe looks similar to the work that you're making. And you are like, but that actually doesn't feel at all like what I'm trying to do. And so you're trying to figure out like, well, what am I doing that's different from that?
Like very different words, very different sort of goals for something that looks a lot like what you're making.
Yeah, and I think that kind of comes around maybe like what I'm sort of loosely calling like a new surrealism that I think I see a lot in painting. It was like,
yeah,
I kind of get why maybe that looks somewhat similar to my work, but actually is like not what I'm interested in.
Cool. Why don't for the sake of like having a concrete term, give us just like a loose definition of what you mean by unreal.
What do I mean by unreal? Yeah, so maybe that's like not even the best word.
It's a good word.
But yeah, I was thinking like real might be sort of like a literal documentation of something. So like literally how you perceive it probably has a lot to do with the idea of like a photograph, right? So like, painting in relationship to a photograph, what you're looking at, like, okay, yeah, I buy that that's something that literally happened. And then sort of anything that kind of deviates from that is sort of moving into the unreal. And even thinking about how there's like situations that you see in the world that you could document, maybe by the way you cropped it, or just because it's just like a really bizarre thing that's happening that is literally what you're seeing, but no one would buy it as real unless you kind of explain the context. I'm kind of also interested in those situations.
Totally, yeah. So the first one you have is a logic of paint, which is I think pretty a common phrase for painters. But let's start there. So I'll jump ahead. Here are some examples that you gave me of artists that you think have a really good logic of paint. Do you want to talk?
And there's like this is just sort of like, I think this is the place in my work when I'm just looking at other artists. I look at a lot of things that are not paintings for my work, even though I make paintings. And this is probably the domain that I'm like looking at painters the most. So it's really hard to just choose three.
It's so hard. I mean, you want to list 100 people.
But yeah.
So here's one of your paintings. What's the logic of paint here? I guess is maybe too like obvious, but I think that's a good place to start. Like, what was your like thing here for this?
Yeah, and so I'm talking about logic of paint, I'm thinking about like everything that paint can do to create meaning outside of like trying to be illusionistic. So like thinking especially in terms of mark making. Of course, there's a lot of things that paint can do that has to do with reality that's about sort of paint being on a two-dimensional surface. And I think we'll get into that a little bit later, but like I'm especially thinking about mark making. And so here it has a lot to do with like interrupting the picture plane with these green dots, which actually was the first thing that I put on. I put on like a full layer of green on this painting, made a bunch of resist dots, painted the whole painting, and then peeled up the dots. So often when I'm thinking about like what can paint do to create a feeling in it of itself, like the actual feeling of the paint, that's like where in my studio, I think if you like go to the next slide or after that.
I mean, that painting is, I think, so clear that like it captures such an intense sensation of like looking at night, of having static in your eyes, which is like impossible to realize naturalistically because it's an artifact of your brain or your neurons. And so it seems like a great place to start.
Yeah, and I think maybe that gets the idea of like maybe something that feels true, more true than real, if that makes sense.
Totally.
And so I think in my work, this is a place where like I'm just constantly doing like weird material tests and like trying out new kinds of experiments. That's sort of what what a corner of my studio might look like, sort of as paintings come together. And this painting on the left kind of started out sort of like some of the work that you see on the right.
Yeah, and nothing about that feels naturalistic, but it totally gives you a sense of like collapsing in a crowd, of like losing yourself in sort of something malevolent. That's maybe
yeah, and I think, I mean, this is like a very old conversation, right? Like if you're going to be engaged in the craft of painting, this is going to be something that you're going to inevitably be thinking about. I mean, I think, and so like I don't think this is like not a particularly maybe new idea that I'm bringing up, but like it felt like an important part of like if I'm thinking about the kinds of unrealism I'm interested in.
Yeah, and it's the basis for the unrealism. I mean, painting is like totally artificial.
Yeah, and I think that's probably part of like what I think, why I'm sort of interested, not sort of necessarily interested in creating this like perfect realism, because I think one of the things that's interesting about painting is like it's a real physical object that's totally an illusion, like smoke show, but then also there's like real, like you can see someone's real hand in there, but maybe that they're making you look like it was a real hand. If you think about someone like Laura Owens, like it looks like a brushstroke, but she's not literally like, it's sort of a artificial gesture that's meant to look like an authentic gesture, and sort of these layers get to pile up on themselves and are like difficult to untangle.
Totally. So the next sort of section, the next sort of rubric you had was craft tradition, the logic of craft traditions. And I think this like is a huge part of your painting practice, because of all the artists I know, you maybe do the most material experiments, or always pushing for something sort of new. You're teaching yourself tons of new skills. You love to learn about how things are made and figure out how to make something new that you've only just imagined. Like on a personal level, what drives you to do that? And then what do you think it brings to sort of the logic of paint? It's a relatively, strange thing in the long tradition of painting to do some of the things you do, but it's totally contemporary. And so,
Yeah, I mean, I think it's sort of like a chicken or egg question in a way, because like it feels like in order to make the kind of paintings that I want to make, I need to like learn about all these different other ways of making images, like making rugs, making stained glass, etc. I wonder if I just loved those things and then I figured out a way to put them into my paintings. But I think one of the things I feel like talking about telling contemporary stories is, sort of taking things from everywhere, right? No other time in history have we been able to have access to as many different kinds of images in the world. And I think often some of like the best art that's being created is not necessarily being created in painting or necessarily be created in like the art world proper. And so I feel like in order to tell stories of the kind of images that we see in the world, I want to use those images. I want to grab those kinds of ways of making. But I also feel like if I'm going to use them, I want to use them with like love and care and respect. And that means like actually learning about how those things are made, and not just sort of like gesturing to them. So oftentimes when I'm making a painting that sort of references like another mode of art or craft making, like I've actually sort of like been the set dresser for the painting. So this is like a part of my work that I don't usually show, but like this is a rug I wove, and then this is a wallpaper that I did in collaboration with a really amazing textile artist named Cassie Vigetigan. And so like learning from printmakers, learning from textile artists, how to make repeat patterns, how to weave a rug, then like I can bring that into painting and kind of have a more, hopefully more depth to the actual paintings.
Yeah, and I
really
think like
sorry, go ahead.
you have the detail here of the back and front of a rug, and I think that's like a great example of like an unreality. You know, it's got its own sort of physical constructs that lead to sort of strangeness that you know, doesn't feel like you would expect it to. The back of a rug, you know, maybe is the thing you'd want to paint rather than the front of it.
Yeah, and I think I'm always fascinated by these places where I see like this weird image has emerged because of a certain kind of constraint, right? Like if you're thinking about a rug, right, it has a warp and a weft. So there's almost like a pixel built into that, right? And so like that changes sort of the way that you can depict something. And so I'm often really interested in the ways that like the things in our lives get passed through a filter that has certain constraints on it, and like what comes out on the other end. And like thinking about constructing paintings that way. So this was like a painting that I made, and I made a repeat pattern, but the repeat pattern itself is like telling the story of the painting, but the painting's also kind of pretending it's like it's a fabric with pockets on it. And so it kind of has those different layers of what's 3D, what's 2D in it.
And like, then you have to make a pattern, and then you have to figure out how that pattern would drape, you know, which is like its own sort of wild problem.
Right. And I find that kind of thing really interesting and like a fun kind of problem to get to work on. Totally. As you can see, like my lovely Zoom background, like it just sort of extends to my whole life of like I just have always been a person who likes to make things. And so when there's something if there's a world that I'm building for my paintings, like I want to build that world. I want to have control over like what the people are wearing, what they're doing.
I mean, in high school, you made a whole bunch of costumes for theater sets.
Yeah. And some of our earliest work was like making these very elaborate little worlds out of paper that we would.
That's true. And then here we got two other paintings, and this is like a totally different craft tradition. You're making, you know, and art tradition. You're making woodblock prints. And you like, I remember maybe it was a year ago, you were like, hey Gus, how do you make a woodblock print? I really want to like put one in a
Yeah, we should go back a slide or two to look at your woodblock print, because you are a great woodblock artist. So this is why I reached out to you. We both really love the woodblock print tradition.
Totally. Cool.
Yeah, so I got interested in like, could I embed woodblock prints into my paintings? And so this is sort of the result of that. On the left, you can sort of see my different mock-ups of like different color schemes for the same woodblock print. And then these two paintings both have the same woodblock print embedded in them, but one is more hidden than the other. So yeah.
And like techniques you teach yourself come back, like the sort of overlaid marks here are done with the same sort of trick you used in the night painting.
Yeah. And I kind of think of it as like building up a toolbox, because like if you want to capture like a world that's really like full of all these different kinds of things, like you should have like a really huge toolbox, because you never know like what thing is going to be thrown at you, and then you're like, oh yeah, I know the thing that I need for that.
Yeah.
And it's also just I think it's like a good way of destabilizing yourself. I think I'm always just trying to like destabilize myself when I'm making a painting, and like not get too comfortable thinking that like I know how to make a painting, or like I know what a painting is.
Totally. Yeah.
Yeah. And
then the destability sort of leads on to like mistranslation, which I think is a really shared interest of ours that comes out in very different ways. You know, you talk about like weaving, you talk about woodblock printing, all these have their own, you know, pixels, they have their own constraints, color, layers, and each of those, as you move it through medium, as you move it through technique, like leads to artifacts and things that come out of, you know, that material. In college, you were making work that was like based off of this same idea. You were really interested in sort of the breakdown of an image as it got translated. And since then, you've totally kept the interest, but changed how you make work. You were making like process-based abstraction at that point.
Yeah, I think we have some images. So some of these images are like photos that I've taken. Some of them, like this second one, is the work of the Russian photographer, Sergei
A longtime interest of yours.
Gorsky, yeah, who like is doing these early color photographs that end up having these like weird, crazy artifacts. And like I tried to make photographs in the same manner, and so like this is probably something I did in like 2013. So yeah, it's been a really long-standing interest. I don't know if you can keep going.
So here's the work you made in college. We don't have to dwell on it, but it is like, I think, just a wonderful thing to point to, like how the interest stays the same, but it comes out in very different ways as you change, as you develop, as your interests mutate.
So if we can go back one slide so we can see. So this is something I think that you've been thinking about a lot too, is like, these like weird moments that like, are pretty mundane, but like have this I don't know if you can speak to that, like how you choose what images like are fodder for your work.
Yeah, I mean, and I think this is like leads to one of the differences in our work, which is you're really interested in like telling it, a story. You're interested in, changing the image, mutating the image to capture like a certain truth. And I would say I have a very similar goal, but I'll make really careful transcriptions of something I find that I think has sort of a hidden meaning, something that sort of floats on the surface of it like a mirage, like the rat trap, which is on the Terminix brand rat traps, and is meant to sell me and tell me something that I think is really different than what the image itself says. And so when I paint it, I try and subtly twist it around so that, I mistranslate it, but in a way that maybe tricks you into thinking it wasn't, so that you get you maybe hopefully get a new meaning, and I think that sort of impulse is in your work, but sort of to a different end.
I just think these moments are so fascinating because they imply for me that like people are engaging with images, like people are like involved in the work of like moving images throughout the world, and like every time it changes hands, like something changes about it that tells you something about like the mind of the person who changed it.
Right.
And so I'm always fascinated with this. I think like if you sort of keep going through the slideshow, I don't know if that's sort of the next one that we're talking about, but sort of the idea of like fakes, like real fakes. Like I was really fascinated. I lived in the Middle East right out of college, and we always had to like purchase rugs for things because people would come to the Middle East and say like, oh, it's the Middle East, I have a great idea, I'll make an art project about rugs, because that was like the first thing they could think of relating to the Middle East. And so they'd say like, Rebecca, you're the assistant, go buy some rugs. Except we couldn't actually afford like hand woven rugs. So I would go to the middle of the desert and like buy all these rugs that were made in China on a machine, but like somehow they were brought to the Middle East. And so I just got really fascinated with all these places, like how do these copies get made? And then eventually this object just like ends up in your house, and you might never even think like, where does this come from? But it actually tells so much about like how the world works, what your tastes are, what your class is, how you're thinking. Like, I think these images actually like are really powerful because they contain the traces of like all these other
There's something that's so often hidden that is like, carefully airbrushed out of our minds. These are all images that you have taken or collected that are sort of, source material. So I thought, I'll click through them. Tell me when to stop.
No, keep going. I feel like we don't have like, we are getting close to the end, so we can move fast.
This is really recent work of yours. And I think, it's like clearly about mistranslation, especially the stuff you're working on at Triangle right now. The detail.
Yeah, so that's like a detail of a work that I'm working on at Triangle, which was kind of like, I made one painting that was maybe sort of a more straightforward view of a scene. And then I thought, what would it look like to have a painting that went through a shredder? So then I painted what I imagined a painting would look like going through a shredder. And that's sort of what I'm working on now. And so, I'm kind of interested in like this extended life of images. Like they don't stop in one place. You can keep sort of doing things to them. And so I think that, when you were talking about like, you're trying to find this image and then through how you paint it, sort of subtly shift the meaning. I think often I find that image and then I think like, that's a cool way to translate something. I'm going to take a different image and translate it in that way or something, like use that as the function for a painting, if that makes sense.
Totally. No, I mean, and I think, this is another good example of mistranslation in some way. You made a paint, you were living in Rhode Island, it's the middle of winter. I know the story because you've told me, and you were taking a class where you had to make a pop-up book. And so you built this elaborate sort of universe for you're mistranslating the sort of notion of a tropical paradise of a warm place, and the juxtaposition in the painting. I don't know if I don't want to speak for you.
Yeah, no, actually, the funny thing is there's a class that was about like digital modeling. So I did not have to make a pop-up book. I decided to make a pop-up book, and then eventually was like, this maybe was not the fastest way to do this, but it was really interesting. It was a really interesting process. And I got to look at a lot of really cool pop-up books in the process and sort of see how this is. And I also was just interested in the pop-up book as kind of like a metaphor for like turning the page on something, like it being in between two moments. And like a pop-up book sort of literally is like that when you like are in the middle of turning a page, like it hasn't quite popped up yet. So it's sort of like, you can sort of see it on the horizon. In this case, I was kind of showing like the wave of a tsunami, like coming over you, except it hasn't hit you yet because you haven't quite turned the page on the pop-up book.
Totally. And then that sort of transitions we already mentioned it about the rugs, the idea of sort of a real fake, which is a funny term. I don't know, maybe what's the platonic ideal of a real fake for you, if that's not a contradiction?
Yeah, so I think we were talking about this and I was like, a painting is obviously the platonic ideal for a real fake, because, it's like so earnest, and I feel like that's how I think about my paintings often. Like I try to make them really earnest and heartfelt and like not interested in ironic painting. Like I put a lot of effort into them. I want people to see that and like to pay it, to like say like, okay, this is something that's worth paying attention to. But at the same time, everything's totally illusion, right? Everything's something that like is coming from somewhere, and you have to sort of acknowledge that. So maybe that's why I love things that are sort of this real fake. But I don't know, I find these kind of images or these kind of objects really poignant because like they're aspiring to be something that they're not quite. I don't know if I can totally
yeah, you don't have to
apart. But yeah, I find them mysterious, and maybe I find like a kinship with them. Like I understand what you're doing, like I do a similar thing.
Totally. And this is a piece that I think talks about the idea of mistranslation and of real fakes, and also speaks to your just interest in any kind of like process you can use to get in at a weird space in a painting. You made paper dolls and then painted them, but not only did you just sort of paint them, you made them in life. You came up with the blueprints, you rendered them.
Yeah. So this painting kind of came out of, I was really interested in like wedding registries and the fact that it seemed like all my friends like had the same things on their wedding registry when they like, and they also never seemed to like to cook before, but suddenly they needed like a copper pan. And I was just interested in these objects, and I also was interested in like the way, just like sort of that transformation of like when you cut out a paper model and fold it, like how that happens. So these are sort of like foldable paper models of all the registry items that you might get, and the one that's actually folded up is the KitchenAid stand mixer, which you can actually see. So I actually made a model of that to see, and like I painted that literal model for this painting. Yeah, it was just really fun. I was kind of imagining like a world of like, oh, like you don't have anyone to marry, but you can get this like wedding registry kit, and like get your own little models of your right. marriage kitchen or whatever. And this is a painting I did of AstroTurf right. for a series that I worked on that was sort of about like imagining. I got really interested in like all these luxury bunkers people were building underground, and like the ways they were trying to recreate what it would look like above ground, underground. Like that is maybe the platonic ideal of a real fake. It's like a whole world that's created to look like it's the actual
Disneyland.
environment.
So the slide it says the logic of the internet just failed.
Okay. Well, that seems fitting.
That seems perfect. But here we are with one of the paintings in the logic of the internet. there's not like a one cohesive culture of the internet.
So like
What about the internet? Yeah, go on.
Yeah, just to give a little context, right? So like the kind of, I think that was sort of the final kind of unreality that I had identified was this like logic of the internet. And you kind of talked about it being like maybe a logic of media more generally, which I think is correct. And that's kind of a logic where like when you're like scrolling on the internet, right? Like many things are right next to each other visually, but might seem to have no reason to be together. And oftentimes like they actually form really strange combinations when they're put together.
Like a more
like they kind of create like a new story when they're put together. Like unexpectedly, these two things talk to each other. And so I think I'm kind of interested in that type of logic. And you were talking a bit about like maybe that coming out of a history of collage or something.
Totally. I mean, when I said, like Rauschenberg and media, when the silk screening images he'd found, and you could trace it back further, but I think there's something particular about the internet that makes it even stranger, that sort of redoubles it. It's not just like the sort of dominant voice, it's anyone's voice on the internet. And it can be, intensely cacophonous.
Yeah. And I think like that overall gets back to like, I'm trying to make these paintings that are about our current moment, and our current moment has so many different voices. And that's part of the reason why I'm like trying to learn all these different techniques, et cetera, is because I feel like I can't just like pretend that I'm speaking with one voice as a painter, because I feel like even as myself, like I'm split up and I'm constantly reading things from different perspectives. And I feel like it would be really like a very incomplete story to just try and like say like, this is my style, this is what the world looks like. I kind of have to say like, we're existing in this moment where actually all these things like that don't seem to make sense come together.
Yeah.
So go back, or sorry.
Go back. Yeah. There's always say for the last like 3 minutes, you list surrealism as one of the things you're not particularly interested in, and so I thought we'd end with like, how does this kind of juxtaposition differ from surrealism for you?
Yeah. I think that oftentimes it seems like, at least if you go back to a history of surrealism, there's like a talking about sort of surrealism as like related to like psychoanalysis or a dream state or like understanding your id, and it's like a way of like accessing images that sort of maybe seemingly seem random, but when put together kind of talk about sort of give you some insight, psychological insight. I'm a little suspicious of that, I have to say. Like I always felt like, why does everyone's id kind of look the same? Like and like, but also that sort of, if it's a lot of different images that maybe don't make sense but all come from one person, whereas I think the interesting thing about the internet is that it's like all these different people are responding to things that they see or just happen to be next to each other. Like, you have a video and you have the comment section for the video, and then you have the person who wrote the takedown of the video, and then you have someone who remixed it and like made a meme of it, like that kind of stuff. It's like it becomes this multiplicity through a multiplicity of voices, which seems more interesting to me personally to work with. Totally.
So if anybody in the, I've been looking at the chat, I haven't seen any questions, but if anybody has a question they want to shoot in right now, this is your moment. I'll just click to the slides too, just to sort of revisit them.
Oh yeah, and if you go back to the one, the clickbait, I don't know if you.
Oh yeah, totally.
See, this one features a cameo by you.
Oh yeah.
The top left is from an image of Gus. I don't know if that's a good place to end it, but.
Yeah.
Thank you, Gus.
Of course. This was a pleasure. I love talking about art with you.
Yeah, me too.
That was one of the most, what's the word I want to use? Like historical conversations, in the sense of like knowing each other's history and being able to speak from that I think I've ever heard. So thank you so much.
Oh,
yeah,
well, thanks.
Rebecca. And thank you, Gus, for joining us.
My pleasure.
Yeah. So it is now, and I wanted to say, Rebecca and Gus, if you wanted to post contact info in the chat in case someone wants to reach out and continue the conversation with you, feel free. And it's now my pleasure to introduce Layo Bright, triangle artist based here in New York, in conversation with curator, producer, artist, and educator Niama Safia Sandy. Welcome.
Thank you, Nova. Hi, everyone. Good evening. Thank you for joining us for this chat. I'm very excited to give some insights into my practice and especially to be speaking with Niama Safia Sandy tonight. Thanks for joining me, Niama.
Thank you for asking me. It's a pleasure to have been invited. So thank you.
Sure. Yeah, so we'll get into it soon. I'm just going to give a brief introduction for Niama and I. So I'm a visual artist based in Brooklyn, New York. I was born in Lagos, Nigeria, and my practice is concerned with exploring themes of family, culture, identity, and migration at the moment. A bit of a background into myself. I received my MFA from Parsons School of Design in 2018. I have gone on to be involved in several shows, residencies to improve my skills and practice. Niama Safia Sandy is a New York-based curator, producer, multidisciplinary artist, and educator. Niama's curatorial practice delves into the human story through the application and critical lenses of culture, healing, history, migration, music, race, and ritual. So I will share my screen shortly. I have a presentation. Awesome. So I'll start off with one of the themes in my work that I've mostly been exploring in Triangle since I began the residency in September last year. This is my maternal great-great-grandmother, and her name was Rosaline Kehinde Lufora. So she emigrated from Sierra Leone, which is something I recently discovered in my family history, and settled in Igbenyi, which is a small village in southwestern Nigeria in Ogun State. For me, finding this picture and learning more about my family history has been a major source of inspiration and connectivity in my practice. It's something I keep coming back to, the idea of my great-great-grandmother's history, how we had never really talked about her in the family prior to me asking questions and like seeking to know who she was. Even her name was something that wasn't remembered, and it just was a nagging feeling at the time, thinking, why didn't anybody else ask questions, and who was this woman, and wanting to know more about that. So Igbenyi is a small town in Ogun State. I've never been there yet, but it was great to connect that to Egba people. So Egba is a subgroup of the Yoruba tribe. So my parents are both Yoruba, my father and my mother's side. But it's a very close-knit community within Ogun State, and many Saru people, that is people that are from other West African countries, but settled into Yoruba states, were in the Egba group of people as well. So it was very interesting for me making these different connections in my research, thinking through family. So I love going through archives, family archives, visiting my grandmother in 2019, December. I went through her album and was just finding these pictures, and that's when my research began. So that's my great-great-grandmother on the left-hand side, and my great-grandmother, her daughter, on the right. When going and digging into family histories like this is deeply personal, but also uncovering a lot of pain and trauma, and thinking through what these women went through, the times they lived in, and what they felt like building these families and being their own selves at the same time. I love this picture because it's 4 generations on my mother's side. My mom is on the left, so Adebisi Bright, Ni Ifaturiti. My great grandmother in the middle, who was in the previous picture on the right, Mrs. Sholabumi Majekudumi, Ni Luforora. And my sister, who's the baby, Mrs. Olubukola Ogunshaki, Ni Bright. And my grandmother, Mrs. Tinola Ifaturiti, Ni Majekudumi. And it started off intuitively when I started making my sculptures, which are these heads that I've been doing and which will come in the following slides. But every family picture I came across of these women always had them in these regalia, always in their gele, which is a head tie, always in their like Yoruba attire. And more than anything, growing up, I've always seen my mom dress up for weddings, dress up for engagements, and like dress herself in this way, crown herself, and it then became a symbol of what then is passed on as well, like all these women carrying themselves with this gait, and also passing that down to the generations following. That's my mom on the left and my great grandmother on the right. I draw a lot of inspiration from Ife heads in my practice with the strifications and looking into legacy, ancestral, which is an extension for me from family. So looking into my Yoruba lineage and the craftsmanship of Yoruba sculptors and how they were able to find a design technique to show a tribal affiliation, to show connections to tribe and kin. The right is Wumonije compound, where a lot of the heads were discovered. And the left is an Ife head of a young woman. I have done a lot of research into plants and botany because my mom is a pharmacist. So the idea of medicine and healing comes in a lot in my works as well. And my maternal ancestor was a herbsman, a medicine man in southwestern Nigeria. So I've been looking a lot into practices of women herb sellers, a lot of uses for particular herbs that I incorporate into my practice, a lot of them which I title my works after or not, but use as inspiration to the particular herbs I'm drawing inspiration from. So these are examples of works I've done with these inspirations in mind, of the passing on the head wraps and gele, and also the plants in my work. The first one, the one on the right, was in 2019, and last year I made the one on the left, Ashrabi red and gold. I now incorporate glass into my practice because I'm very interested in how glass as a medium is, you know, interpretive of the themes in my work. Glass as a mirroring factor, glass as a resilient material. And here are a few works I've made recently with that in mind. I have been making these like personal paintings, watercolor paintings, thinking through roots and blooming and becoming. I'm very interested in having these spaces of flow just to think through more of how like I dream of the themes in my work, how I imagine the connections taking place or not, and how there's a sense of disconnect as well to those histories that I can't fully complete. These are works I have ongoing at the moment. I'm happy to show a few images and then start the conversation. Niama?
Right. Do you want to get into this now?
Good.
Oh, wonderful for everyone who's in the chat. Please do know that we will be trying to get to any questions that you pose there. So please go ahead and drop any questions you may have into the chat. Uh-oh.
Yeah, sorry about that.
It's okay. Sometimes it's hard to get out of sharing your screen. So I'll just sort of pose my thought/question while you're doing that. I was so surprised to learn and really like intrigued to learn that your great grandmother was from Sierra Leone. So I wondered if you had visited at all.
I haven't yet been.
Mm-hmm. And do you know where in Sierra Leone?
That is something that we're working through right now. I think one thing about going down this line is the questions just don't end.
Yeah.
There's a lot of
more questions than anything else. It's true.
Exactly. Like I was on the phone with my mom today and we're still digging, and like she's asking her sisters and her aunts and uncles. But I think with every family line, there's a point where it stops, right? Like you can't know every answer. Yeah. It's more a sense of trying to understand the present and oneself with as much information as you have. Mm-hmm. So the idea is not to let the faces we see go without naming, go without their stories, which telling my mom's story or using her as a muse in my works is a big part because of that. That, you know, the women I do know intimately, my family, I'm very interested in making them visible and not letting that just go. I want my nieces and nephews and their generations to remember that through the tangible, which is why I name my works that are about her after her as well.
Mm-hmm. So listening to you talk about the work through the presentation, I feel that there's a certain kind of rootedness, and I mean quite literally in some cases, because you're also talking about these sort of like botanical and herbal remedies as well. And then also, because of course you're talking about your mother's line, this matrilineal line, I'm wondering also about this idea of the womb itself as root space. And then of course, I don't think you actually mentioned this in your presentation, but when we spoke a few weeks ago, you mentioned this idea that your mother has wanted to name all of the granddaughters with her name as their middle name, which I love because it's also then creating a sort of connective tissue again, apart from the obvious, like, you know, genetic connection that there is, but then like this idea of like naming oneself in a certain way is super powerful. And of course, you all are Yoruba, like the names are very, very important. Mm-hmm. So I just wondered what you thought about that. And then also this idea of naming the works in such a way that these, you know, botanical elements are also in there. And I was wondering about this idea of repair. Like, do you think that even subconsciously, because I feel like based on your facial expression, maybe no one has ever asked you that before. So I wonder, what do you think?
Yeah, I'll break it down into like a few parts actually. So the part about my mom naming the grandchildren is her granddaughter specifically. So she started this thing where my sister had her first daughter and she was like, well, I want my name to be remembered and I'm going to start naming all my granddaughters at ABC, which is her name. And it was seemingly, you know, funny at the time, but by the time we had the fifth granddaughter in the family and another at ABC, so because of the naming practice in Yoruba tradition, her name would actually be like the fourth or fifth name in line for the child. So it doesn't really appear on their birth certificate, but she's like, well, it's a name. And she calls them Adibisi when she sees them. And it has a lot of layers to it because her middle name is Iyaduni, and Iyaduni means mother returns. And her dad had named her that because he was remembering his mom who had passed when he was young. And it's kind of a name that you speak into existence, that this child will be loved, this child will give you that endearing love and affection that a mother would have given him. So for her to then do this, I thought was her trying to live on in a way. And my mom is someone that's always voiced in different ways, feeling a sense of not being heard or not knowing what next, like how does all the teachings and how do things live on? I think for me, it's a vulnerability, the idea of mortality and death and what then happens next. Where is the legacy? Legacy, not just in like, oh, great, empowerment, legacy that really what is left. And sometimes it's the things that aren't written. Sometimes it's the things that just carry on. And recently I was reading someone's post and they're like, you only truly die when your memory is gone. And that made me really think of the symbolism of her actions. What she was doing was trying to leave us with a legacy that was embodied through her naming of the grandchildren. So that's something she's kept doing, which informed my series on her at ABC, which is these glass pieces, kiln cast glass pieces that just keep replicating. It's the same features, but in different colors and like modes of glass making that I think mirror an experience. I love the quality of the shiny glass because when people step in front of it, I like to think that they can see a reflection in there. Maybe maybe it's muddled, but I enjoy that quality while speaking to the botany around the face and just trying to get a sense of capturing a moment or a name or an idea of the inevitability that comes with, passing on.
And so the question about repair.
Repair. That is, you're right. Nobody's ever asked me about that. But repair is also, it's very hard for me to talk about repair, especially at a time of trying to repair a lot personally. It there's a lot of fracturing that comes from like understanding that you can't connect the roots in a lot of ways, understanding that there are disconnections. Like even having grown up in Nigeria, there are a lot of things I don't know about my culture. There are a lot of things that I can't speak Yoruba as fluently as some people. So, in some parts of Nigeria, like they would laugh at my Yoruba because I do have an accent that is westernized. So it's not the same kind of accent or intonations that I should use that I do speak. So there are fragments and like disconnections, but then you still belong to the fold in a sense. So repair is what would be desired, I would say, but not necessarily where things are at. And aside from like the immediate people that surround one, I think of like community. Family isn't just like bloodline as well. Like family is your chosen family as well. And within the past year, yeah, that's been hard. Just repairing past all the trauma that comes with, being a Black woman, being in the United States at a very tense political time. Also dealing with a lot of protests back home in Nigeria and the killings at the Lekki Tollgate massacre. I was posting on my Instagram stories this morning about young girls and still thinking about Chibok and the kidnappings that happened. So there are layers to that repair would be great, but that's that's what I'm gunning for, really. I don't know how it will come or where it will come. So
I want to kind of switch gears to a question about materiality, because I think we are getting close to the place where we'll have to wrap up. So why glass? I mean, like, we have had a conversation about this, but I guess I kind of want to hear it again. And I also am wondering whether it's connected to this idea of like the surface itself being penetrable in a certain way by the viewer. Also, is there something about the light element of it, light interacting with the surface in a certain way?
I think it's all those things and then some. Glass for me is just such a magical medium. I enjoy the qualities that it carries. I think working with it in different ways and seeing that, yes, it can be clear, or like working with opacity, or just letting materials come through, like with this work where I use the bags as part of the rendition of the work and letting the glass speak through that as well. It it really allows a range that I enjoy, but in itself, glass is amorphous, so it doesn't stop moving. It's neither solid nor liquid. So the idea that this is, though it looks solid, is constantly in motion is interesting to me. It forms like an interesting struggle where I'm also grappling with all these issues that are unresolved. So that the medium itself keeps living and keeps moving, and the molecules are never static is an interesting thought while addressing all these issues.
Yeah. I mean, I wanted to talk about those paintings that you shared, but I do also want to come back to the Ghana Must Go bag fabric that's beneath. Or I guess it's really the pattern, because this is not the actual fabric itself on these pieces, right?
I do use the pattern, and then I also use screen prints. So the bag itself does have its own history of migration, and though they originated in China and have a whole history around the world, I'm interested in the trade of the material. I'm interested in the history of the material, which are mainly xenophobic in many African countries, including Nigeria, including South Africa, Zimbabwe, so many countries. The idea of deciding who is desired and who isn't also comes in with the materiality, as well as knowing that it's a bag as we know it. The pattern has been used in these plastic bags, that a bag symbolizes carrying something for me, like where you keep things or how you move things around as it is used. And I think of that like hopes and dreams and burdens as well, what we actually carry within us, um, what we carry with us and what we hope for. I think it's always come in that way for me, that regardless of background, different people have a connection with the material. And I do enjoy that quality, that regardless of my personal background, there are ways that this speaks to people, maybe for example, like class issues or displacement, which I think are a lot of universal issues that we can connect with and try and understand each other through them.
Beautiful. And I just wanted to touch on the paintings for them, because I don't think you had showed me those, if I am correct.
I'll just go see these paintings. Yeah, these are private works. I mean, it's open studio, so why not? I make these just in reflection of thinking around like rootedness. I've been looking a lot at Frida Kahlo's work recently. There's something that just feels very natural and fluid about making these, and it takes me to a place of feeling like I'm understanding the issue extends beyond what I can grapple with in one medium. So it's like a meditative process of just making these like abstracted, rooted heads that are floating sometimes, and that also have like flora around them sometimes, and trying to make sense of it all and see how like the connectivity either forms or doesn't.
They kind of look like garden eggs to me.
Interesting. I've been told they look like flower buds or like, and when I do say their heads, I've been told they're slightly creepy.
That's fair. I think, like I said before, we have about 4 minutes. So if you have questions, please do drop them in the chat. Someone said they love the movement in these. They remind them of jellyfish or ocean critters. There was a question that was posed earlier. Let's see. Going back to the first few pieces, the person has asked, Nanci Amaka has asked, can you tell us what the first few pieces were made of?
So these pieces, I believe you're referring to, they're an assemblage of Ghana Muscu bags, which are the plastic bags I use in the works, wood, pottery, with the faces pottery with like a gold pigment overlay, and the head wraps are actual gilly fabric that my mom has worn to various events.
I think perhaps maybe they also wanted to know about the actual faces themselves.
So yeah, the faces are pottery. So the gold pigment is then painted onto the pottery after I sculpt the face and it's dried. Um, yeah, is there any specific question on the face? Like, oh,
Nope, not from what I could see. But I just wanted to make sure that this person got a thorough answer because I'm pretty sure they were asking about that as well. And I know when we chatted, I know we have just maybe 2 minutes or so left, but I know that you have been sort of exploring glass more. So I wondered if you wanted to chat about that a bit more.
yes. So I am in the process of working on hot glass blown molds. So right now, these sculptures are me taking inspiration from a lot of things in my work, but also affixing these like female subjects within structures. I'm really inspired by caryatids and the idea of women forming part and parcel of structures, literally in political spaces, but also in homes and wherever they find themselves as supportive. I question that in many ways. So I'm trying to make molds out of these now and kind of blow hot glass into the molds and have them be like a series of work. So there's different ones. This one alludes more to the style I've been making them in, but I'm yet to make like a full glass sculpture in 3D form yet, which is really interesting to me to make that happen and maybe fill it with some liquid, fill it with something, play around with the shapes a bit more. Yeah, and experiment.
Awesome. Oh, last person, do you use live model for the faces? That question was posed by Hidemi Tagi. I'm sorry if I mispronounced your name.
I do not yet. I'm for some of them like it's not this one is based off of my mom, so like I did use a photo reference for this, but with these ones I kind of made them just anyone from memory and just thinking through this one. Actually, I was thinking of Stacey Abrams and the Georgia elections that happened. That was actually the inspiration for the first piece, and just all the conversation around Black women holding space and, you know, doing so much to shape the future and politics and everything. So sometimes, yes, it's based on the idea of a person, and sometimes a reference or not.
Awesome. I think we are at time. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Niama.
My pleasure. Thank you for inviting me to be in conversation with you. Thanks, Nova.
Yes, thank you so much to you both. And definitely put, your contact information in the chat in case anyone wants to continue the conversation. And Niama, we are looking forward to you visiting the studios of all the artists for a curatorial visit in a couple weeks. So we're excited about that.
Yes, I'm looking forward to it too.
And I'm so happy now to introduce Jodie Lyn-Kee-Chow, triangle artist based here in New York, and fellow artist and mentor Juan Sánchez, another pair who have known each other a good long time. Welcome.
Yes.
Well, let me just begin that I'm very excited to be here with Jodie and with all of you. The couple past conversation has been really stimulating and exciting. I just want to read briefly Jodie's bio, and then I'm going to tell a little bit about our history together. Jodie Lyn-Kee-Chow is an interdisciplinary artist who often stages live and lens-based performances. She constructs narratives with wearable sculptures, drawings, and prints that aim to highlight the lost traditions and stories of her own heritage, cultural ideology, and the effects of migration, globalization, and climate change. Using urban and natural landscape, some of which are culturally significant, she places the audience as the role of witness to her reclaim. Jodie, if you were to put the first slide.
Sure.
Well, she's doing that. Jodie and I go as far back as 2001. She entered into the MFA program at Hunter College, and she was my student. She was in my seminar, and we also did a tutorial together. I'm talking about my slide, Jodie.
Okay, let me go to the next slide. There we go.
Okay, thank you. So anyway, I've seen Jodie evolve in the program. She came in as a painting major, and it's amazing how she spread out and experimented and collaborated with other students and do a series of performances, live performances together. And so it's amazing how she has evolved in the program. And then when she graduated, she really kicked off very strong. I mean, she started exhibiting quite a bit. She started to do these performances all over the place, and I've been following her. And I kind of felt like this is someone that I wanted to collaborate with, or I wanted her to collaborate with me. And I'm basically a painter and a photographer and a printmaker, and my work deals a lot with anti-colonial issues, particularly with the independence movement for Puerto Rico, and also the Black Liberation Movement and other movements for self-determination. But in seeing how students were creating and manifesting themselves in performance, and seeing Jodie, I was kind of like inspired to dab into video. And that's when she collaborated in a couple of video projects. One of them, which was back in 2009, Madre Selva, which is an homage to Ana Mendieta, which was a dear friend of mine. And the other one, wearing the Vigigante mask, which is a folkloric Afrocentric mask from Puerto Rico. I did a series of shots with the intention of working on another video piece with her. So the point of the matter is that we stayed connected. We collaborated together on a couple of projects, and I'm just glad that that she's here with me. So what I wanted to do is just to open up, because I want Jodie to really talk and engage with her work. I wanted to pose a first question, which is kind of like open-ended. But the question is, taking into consideration that you are a person, I mean, I could point to my African, to my Taino, and to my European Spanish roots. But Jodie, I think you go much further than that. You know, as a Jamaican who has ties to China and to Africa and who knows what else. So my question is, who, as an artist, as a performance artist, who are you? And the second part to that question is, why are you?
Wow. Well, I'm going to start to say that I am a creature of creation and a creator. And I'm a spirit, and I am a conjurer of spirits. And I'm really into expressing my humanity, all sides of it. I'm human, I'm woman, I'm a daughter, I'm a sister, I'm a cousin, I'm family, I'm kin. So, yeah, I think I'm really in a fortunate position to be able to be a human who creates. And I am just an earthling and part of this amazing universe. So, yeah.
So let's start with your first slide. Let's
Yeah. Okay.
I want you to talk through these images.
Yeah. Okay. So back when I was at Hunter, and you saw that I entered in painting, as you said, and I remember when when I was halfway in the program, I was like, oh, I don't think I'm a painter. I don't talk like painters, but it's kind of funny that I decided to go into performance and combine media. I started to play around with collaging and collaging fabrics. I had a fascination with fabrics from early on. In fact, even before college, I was like drawing images of models and fashion magazines and fashion. So that's kind of like my inspiration, fashion and also folklore and common everyday objects. I was looking at decoration, you know, of the home interiors and architecture, a lot of different things, but these are the things that spoke to me the most. And so this is one of the first picnic pieces that I made. Yeah, this is like 6 years after I graduated from Hunter, but that I started to making these collage pieces, but this is like a later iteration of one of my first collage pieces. So I started to play around with patterning, and I always wanted to be a fashion designer, but it just never happened. And I just started to make my own patterns. I remember watching my grandmother, and no, not my grandmother, but my mom sew clothes. And then, you know, she later told me that my grandfather was a master tailor, and all of these things are just so interesting how it just worked its way into my hands. So here I am at a performance art festival in Boston, and I took the highest peak and went up there and did this random performance, had like a number of fruit baskets, and invited the public to interact with me on this picnic tablecloth dress. And it's made out of cheap 99-cent materials. I'm really attached to working with these materials, very flimsy, you know, but at the same time, it was very commonplace where I grew up in Jamaica and seeing these tablecloths everywhere. So yeah, I decided to combine that with the image of the woman. I thought a lot about my grandmothers and their history as farmers and caretakers, you know, so that's very much.
Can you show, since that performance had been done a number of occasions, has it been evolving? I would like us to see the video that came out of that.
Yeah, so I've been doing these picnic performances. I'm kind of more known for doing these performances. Can
you turn it on?
Yeah,
as
sure.
You talk?
I'm gonna, yeah. And I have another video after this too that shows you a little bit more of like the whole crew crossing the street. You'll see that. But yeah, I started to incorporate, to make this a moving sculpture, not just standing on a hill. And I wanted to be even more daring with it, taking up more space, using my body as a tool to be even more visible and to tell the story of migrants. I thought a lot about agriculture, as I said, as a part of my family, but thought about trade and where does the food come from. I'm sorry, why is this like not moving to the next slide? But yeah, I thought about food and migration and trade and how we were at a time of with politics in terms of how immigrants are being treated, and yet, you know, it's like Trump didn't wanted to put up a wall, you know, with Mexico, but yet we're importing so much of their avocados. The avocado is like such a trendy food, and it's just one of those stories that made me think about this work when I was making it.
But you have a procession
yes.
going on, and you have music.
Yes.
You know? Talk a little bit about that. There's also an aerial shot that you may have.
Yes. All right, my computer's a little bit glitchy, but yeah. And then I wanted to, with that piece that you saw me taking it down 14th Street for Art in Odd Places a couple years ago. Because of the rules and regulation of the festival, I had to shoot this performance beforehand. So technically, this is at a drone field by my house. And I wanted to document the aerial view of this work because I'm very much interested in the patchwork. I'm interested in the design and the collage, and I made it like all these different colors and all of these different prints to kind of like nod to everyone of a different cloth, but yet we're sharing the same cloth, which is probably a figure of speech that leads to that, but yeah. And here I am opening up this, you know, having my performers, picnic goers, display this for you. So it's like a picnic blanket to be shared by all, basically. That's the concept of it. Yeah, it took a while to make, but it was part of my Franklin Furnace project.
But in a way, I mean, you know, this question of the collage and doing patchwork quilts, so to speak, right? Mm-hmm. As a picnic spread, right? Yeah. And then there's the distribution of food, you know, like a lot of the procession in tradition sometimes happens at a time of death, you know, like a funeral procession, even with music and everything, pointing out to the tradition, let's say in New Orleans or whatever. But at the same time, I kind of feel that it's more about life. It's about giving. It's about sharing. There's a physical component to this, but I kind of feel that there's also a spiritual component. Can you speak to that?
Wow, that's a good question. Like, I grew up in Jamaica, right? And Jamaica is primarily a Christian nation. I would say very Christian. In fact, in Jamaica, in Kingston in particular, there are the most churches per square capita in the Caribbean. Probably, yeah, in the Caribbean for sure. Like every square block, every block would have a church on it. And so I do come from somewhat of a religious family on my mother's side in particular, but also my paternal grandmother, she was very religious. And anyway, I have my own way of coming to terms with spirituality. I'm not religious, but I'm spiritual. And I like to embody this character of a goddess, or also a nurturer. I think about ritual, maybe even the ritual of caring, as a way of being like a godlike figure. And spirituality, that's such a big term, but I think about ancestors too, and I'm thinking about how they in the past practiced religion and spirituality. And I'm not talking just from my Jamaican side or Afro-Jamaican side, but also my Asian side and European side, and the archetypes that comes with that too, and maybe even playing some of these roles that come out of that. Yeah.
Can you follow through with your next?
Yeah. So, sorry, it's a little bit lagging on my end, but here we go. So, yeah, here I am now at Triangle. These drawings are behind me, but these are like a close-up of some of them. Yeah, I'm currently working on this piece called Junkanuakam. It's been an ongoing piece, but it's a multifaceted multimedia series. I'm interested in exploring the Jamaican Junkanu, and if you don't know what Junkanu is, it's a masquerade that was created by enslaved Africans. I'm hearing that it was created in Jamaica, but there's stories that said it was created in the Bahamas. But it's traditionally practiced in English-speaking Caribbean. Trinidad has their own variation, but actually there are variations of this here too in North Carolina, South Carolina, New Orleans, and even West Africa in Ghana. They have the Fancy Dress Festival. So I've been, I decided to start exploring this project, I guess, from thinking about my own history and my own education. Like when I was in Jamaica, actually, I didn't grow up knowing about these figures. And so I was just really intrigued by that why didn't I know so much about this? And I asked my parents about Junkanu, like, hey, did you know about Junkanu while growing up? And they were like, no, we didn't even see that growing up. I even asked my grandmother, no, she didn't. And so it just made me want to delve into it more. And I came across an initial image. Actually, I'll show it to you in a book. The reason why I decided to delve in this even more is because I came across the drawings of Isaac Belisario, who was a Jewish Jamaican illustrator back in the early 1800s, documenting this procession, this masquerade. Also, I don't know if I should even bring it up, but just the word Junkanu, I just thought it was kind of, fascinating. I had, based on the picnic dress pieces, there was an artist that was copying me, making her own version of my picnic dress, the red and white one in particular. And she went by the name of Junkanu, her IG.
Can you move on with the images as you talk?
Yeah. She went on with the Junkanu as part of her IG, and I was like, why is she appropriating? So I just reclaimed it. Anyway, yeah, so these are more of my Junkanu characters. I drew them with, as you see, pencil, colored pencil and watercolor. I'm having a lot of fun drawing these, and so they're about like 10 to 15 characters that I'm interested in developing, and drawing them is the way that I investigate and design my costumes as part of it. So after that, I'm still drawing some of the costumes and still trying to figure out the characters, because different texts have different, they list like different characters. So it's not like a consistent set anywhere. Because there are different troops on the island and in different places. And so it's interesting to see Junkanu explored or expressed differently in different places. Here I am now. This is 2019. I received an invitation to propose a parade for a major museum in New York City for their 150th anniversary, the Metropolitan Museum of Art, but that never happened because of COVID. So here we are. I had to illustrate what my characters would look like in Central Park. And I started to just do these drawings, roughly drawn somewhat with watercolor. And I've been having a ball with them, putting them in these spaces. And these are imagined. I'm not really working from it much source material. So it's been an interesting way to work. And I just recently got a residency before this one at Triangle at Governor's Island, and I decided to take a few of my characters out there on Governor's Island and do these little vignettes, these little videos. And here is one called Pirouetting on the Pagank. I made this maybe like a week before the elections, and that week when there was debate about who won the elections, I posted this on IG and I got a lot of likes because I think it was just very telling of the moment. And though you can't hear the sound, what's in the background is a helicopter. You know, the sound of a helicopter was very deafening almost. So I just thought that was kind of an interesting take. So, do you want me to go on to the next slide?
Yes, please. We're running. We're going to be wrapping up soon, so you have to. Yeah.
Perfect. So yeah, when Biden-Harris won, I decided to take this action on the street of Brooklyn. I'm not white-faced as in the previous Junkanoo performances. Those masqueraders are a lot of them are white-faced or have masks on. And in this one, I decided to not paint my face white and just put a regular mask on for COVID, and I took it out on the street. And it was a really riveting moment on November 6th of 2020.
Can you talk about that large house that you have on your head?
Yeah, so this is a model of the White House. I modeled it after the Junkanoo character that has a plantation house on the head. And so I wanted to make my own contemporary version of a Junkanoo, because the Junkanoo in the past would mock slave masters and make fun of them. And it was actually okay that one time of the year that they could do that, which was during the holidays between Christmas and New Year's. So I want to do a Junkanoo any day, every day. And this one was perfect for this moment. I was like, okay, it's the time to wear the White House on my head. And I can be a woman of color and I can be in the White House. That's what this is saying.
Well, this one image, this one drawing that you did at the studio, which you have 4 figures with this red dress that connects. And I want you to go to that image because what follows is what came out of it.
Sorry. Yeah. All right, let's go. Okay, yeah. So here I am now. I made this drawing actually the same time I was working on that proposal for the Met, and I was thinking about the women of Seneca Village as part of that story that I would like to tell in a procession. And these 4 women are also a part of Belisario's drawings, Red Set Girls. They're women wearing red. Actually, there were men dressed as women wearing red dresses, typically. But I wanted to take inspiration from that, weave that into the story of Seneca Village about the women there who were very much in charge of building a church before, this is before Central Park is what Central Park is today. And I was thinking about the 4 directions. I was also thinking about the Met Gala, like the red carpet basically, and thinking about the crossroads, thinking about intersections and and thinking about blood. Yeah, when I made this.
I mean, this is amazing, because it's just an outpour, it's almost like a stream of consciousness of what these elements, signifies. And, just seeing that X, you know, which we're also familiar with, right? Even the way we in the African diaspora constantly are struggling and fighting against being X out,
That,
which follows to the next slide
yeah.
because it speaks to the victims of police brutality, among other things.
Yes. So I'm glad that I'm bringing this work up, because when I made that sketch, it wasn't as thought out as what I think it could become. So I was like, okay, well, what's the point of just all red? I think I need to say more than that. I think I need to use this space where the red is, like these blocks, these I don't know, these parts of these red pieces of cloth, and they're all the same dimension. And I was thinking about the scale too, and yeah, and the sidewalk. It just seemed reminiscent of that. And so there's even this meditative process when I'm making the work, because I take these letters that are made of sponge and I dip them in the acrylic, and I space it all out by hand. I'm not using any computer. I'm not using any other tool besides the ink and the paint and the stencil lettering. And I'm just, writing each name.
We have about 3 more minutes, so I think it's important also for you too, because you're kind of like naming. You're naming people. Who are these people? You're naming them, and taking into consideration this ritual that you want to create with these gowns or dresses. I would like to hear why the naming. What is it that does as a performance, as evidence of what has transpired throughout the decades?
I'm thinking about the pain of the woman that the woman, the wife, the mother, the sister, who have to bear the pain of these lost lives. Obviously, there would be 200 names as part of the dress, around that number. So this here is only 5 names, and I'm thinking about the scale too, and I'm thinking the scale would actually emphasize the magnitude. I mean, each block of that has a name is about the same size as the front of a casket if you're looking at it like straightforward. So yeah, I mean, it's so much time, it's so much effort, that goes into each name, but at the same time, it's parallel to the mark that each person may have left on us, when they pass.
We have about a minute left, so
Yeah.
what would be the last thing that you would like to do? I think, if I remember, I think you did a shadow video.
Oh yeah. So
why don't you put that on? Time didn't allow us to cover other areas. But
okay.
Put that on and speak over it in terms of what that meant. That's something that was fairly recent. And these are photographs from performances that you've done.
Yeah, and I'm about to do this performance again at Smack Mellon on February 20th. But yeah, I wanted to end with this video sketch. I've been doing video sketches in my studio and at home, and just to pass the time. I'm bored very often. So I just start experimenting, and I typically, sometimes I just share them with my close friends on Instagram. But I sent this to you, and you were saying, yeah, there's probably something there to share, and I'm happy with it. I think the image, it's interesting how how the hand becomes the crown, and I'm playing with that. Yeah.
But there's also this thing about your physicality, the aura, the spirit that moves you to do your work, and that physicality creating this shadow, which makes you anonymous in a way, but yet you flow with movements. You're trying to almost like a pantomime. You're moving and you're conveying a series of feelings and moment. So what would be the very last thing, very short, I think we only have a few seconds left, what would be the very last thing you want to say? Maybe in a few words.
Wow, trick question. You think about your mark that you're going to leave on the world, whether it's a visual mark or a sound, or think about that. Think about what you want people to think of when you leave. Oh, and by the way, I meant to say, I'm working on a coloring book. So if you can't draw, color, and I don't know, think about making some kind of mark. That's all.
Well, thank you. It's been wonderful sitting down with you. I wish we had another half hour, but it's been great. Thank you so much.
All right.
And thanks Nova and Triangle for having us over.
Thank you, everyone. Okay.
Thank you so much, Juan and Jodie. And that was a beautiful point to end on. And please do post your contact information in the chat, if anyone wants to follow up with other questions or conversation. And I'm really pleased now to introduce our final conversation of the evening between Triangle artist Natalia Nakazawa and fellow artist Nanci Amaka. Welcome.
Hi, everyone. I think we're just a bunch of kindred spirits. As everyone was talking, there are just so many connection points between all of our practices. And it's really exciting to hear about sort of like the deep dive everyone's doing. So I'm just very thankful to be here, and thanks for listening. And one last presentation. So it's my pleasure. I'm actually going to introduce Nanci and myself. And Nanci and I, we go back, way back, to the lands of San Francisco. We are very deeply bonded. We are two bonded people who have been through a lot in the sense of developing as artists, as friends, as mothers, and we've been able to share our journey together in a meaningful way, and her friendship has been just a cornerstone of my life, and I'm just so very, very thankful to share space with her. So thank you, Nanci. And she's coming all the way from Hawaii, so.
Shucks, Nanci.
We get to be here in this virtual space, and it's so exciting.
It is very exciting. First, I want to make sure that everyone, you can see the screen, yeah?
It looks great.
Okay, perfect.
Okay. So I'm just going to briefly introduce Nanci and her practice. Nanci Amaka is an interdisciplinary artist exploring ideas surrounding trauma, ancestry, memory, and West African animism, working from the theory that traumatic events challenge perceptions of power, autonomy, and identity. Her work explores the liminal space between these experiences and language. And then just a little bit about my own practice. I'm working in painting, textiles, and social practice. My community-driven projects explore ideas of transnationality, cultural identities, storytelling, archives, and patterns of migration. Blurring the boundaries between education, activism, and art making, my work is deeply collaborative. So with that, Nanci's actually going to show a little bit about her work.
Sure. Thank you all so much for joining. I'm going to start with just sort of giving a little, I'm going to play a couple videos of my latest body of work. So as Natalia introduced, I am a multidisciplinary artist. I, like a lot of the other artists, just presented. I do work with ancestry a lot. I'm very interested in memory and more specifically memories around trauma or very powerful events, very impactful moments in lives. And I'm interested in how those events vibrate forward into the future and also backwards. I'm interested in sort of the traumas that we inherit and intergenerational trauma. I'm interested in sort of people's identity, how they define themselves based on either their ancestry, their parentage, and also based on their aspirations. So I do a lot of sort of like time traveling. In the latest body of work, I did a series of performances. The work is called Ije Eze, Ije being my mother's name, Eze being my daughter's name. And the work itself was sort of born from in the moment that I found out I was pregnant, where I had to contend with my own history of trauma and the idea that I was going to be bringing a new person into the world and that they would sort of inherit my identity as well as all of my ancestry. And so I really needed to contend with it. And I did a series of performances where I stood in the moment and thought about my mother. My mother was killed when I was very young and I witnessed it. And I knew that that was something that was going to be affecting me. And so I really worked with, in this piece is called Passer. And with Passer and a lot of the other performances, I stood in the memory of my mother and in the idea of trauma. And I did a lot of looking into West African animism. I'm also Nigerian. Naija represent. We know the Carrie Lasto. But yes, I did a lot of sort of like inviting the energy of my mother as well as inviting her spirit and being present in the trauma itself and allowing my child to sort of recognize what my body did when I was thinking about my mother and about my history and sort of allowing her to know that
the landscape of Hawaii, like where you are situated, yes. Like how did that impact?
Absolutely. So that is that's definitely a huge part of my work, and that would lead us into another. So this is sort of a general trailer of like, it's just like a collection of the series of performances that I did. And yes, Natalia, this is really important because Nigeria has a very similar, at least the parts of Nigeria I grew up in, has a very similar landscape to Hawaii where I live in now. And so I did a lot of work where I picked locations based on things that invoked certain memories from me and places that just had energy imbued in them. So anytime you see me in the performances where I'm alone, I have the child in utero, and then I continue the performance after I birthed her. And again, the idea, I was thinking about all these different West African spirits and energies, and our stories of different animist characters as I engaged with the environment. So there's a lot of communing with landscape as a way to process trauma. So this is just sort of like a glossing over of my work, and we are going to show you. Oh, and that's my future right there. Beautiful. I'm commenting myself.
A lot about our kids.
But so I'm going to go back to kind of our presentation, and we'll do more of like a formal thing. I'm here to support Natalia. I'm going to sort of reference some of my work too as we talk, but mainly we're going to be talking about some of the themes that run between both of our works. And these are just some more images. Some of them are stills and some are photographs of some of the performances I did. Again, a lot of this, the one on the left, Otu Abo Ato, is Igbo for my language, Igbo for 1, 2, 3. So I did a lot of standing meditations, a lot of counting, and a lot of slow movements. So, and then speaking of landscape, so in the image on the left is a still from a video standing performance I did in a location that is in a banana grove. And that, just an example, is very important to me because my mother was buried in a banana grove. So I found this place, it had the same sort of energy as where her grave is. And I did a standing meditation there. And then after my child was born, we went back and did another performance and meditation with her present. And again, the idea being to incant things, to pull on history, and at the same time actively push forward and reinforce it for my daughter as well. So I grew up without photographs of my mother around, and that was something that was very traumatizing for me psychologically, and which I think a lot of people on this panel, and Natalia for sure deals with, which is sort of an erasure of certain histories from even our education systems. And I wanted to make sure that I sort of reinforced that, and I wanted her to be actively part of the performances themselves so that she, from the very onset, understood the very, very, very importance of her history, traumatic or otherwise. And that was my way of like actively challenging these sort of like platforms. Okay, so we'll start with this quote, Natalia. I was supposed to read this, but I think you should read it because I think that you have, I think that you can read it better for us. So could you please?
So I just love everything that you said, Nanci, and I think that it's really important to acknowledge that we don't just start from nowhere, you know, and that, you know, teaching our children and having this sort of intergenerational discussions with our elders, with us, with our young ones, and showing them the continuity like a thread, that we're all connected, that we're not alone, that, you know, we all share some kind of space together. And actually time can't erase that. Like nothing can erase it. It's there. It's embedded in us. And so I love this Orhan Pamuk quote. So I just wanted to start with it. And it just says, we don't need more museums that try to construct the historical narratives of a society, community, team, nation, state, tribe, company, or species. We all know that the ordinary, everyday stories of individuals are richer, more humane, and much more joyful. And I say this because also I think in the art world especially, you know, joy is sort of looked at with contention or maybe like confusion even. Like when we have children gathered with us, people might think it's less critical. And I want to really trouble that because I think that children turn into adults. And so we need to be having conversations and sharing our thoughts with our children. And so this is where I start actually at the Met with one of my longest kind of running projects called Our Stories of Migration, which is really this. Someone once asked me like, well, who my audience is, and my audience is really also a participant. I don't really see too much of a separation between audience members and people actually making my work. So our story, if you could go back just 1 second, Nanci, I want to just talk a little. So for this project, which I was invited to participate in the Met's World Culture Festival. And what was exciting about that is that I brought my textile, which is a composite, a digital composite, a lot of sort of leftover or forgotten images from the Met's collection, from their open source collection. And all of these pieces, there are pieces that maybe don't fit perfectly into a particular collection based on sort of racial, national, or otherwise narratives. And so I kind of picked up the messier, weirder things from the collection that I was drawn to and composited them into a world map that then was woven into a jacquard textile. And that textile, because I wanted something that was accessible, tangible, and had young people of all ages participate in sort of a collaborative process where there was maps, they like drew on maps their own ancestry, like histories. So talking about where their parents or grandparents may have come from, so their own stories of migration, or where they've traveled to in their current life, or where they want, like I had a 5-year-old who was like, I want to go to this country. And I'm like, great. And we had a discussion about where that was and why that, you know. So it was more about offering up the sort of potential space to have the conversations. And it was great to hear like a kid talking to her, you know, her mother being like, I want to go here because of this. And like, just sort of initiating those discussions.
Yeah.
Okay, so next slide.
I want to kind of touch on this. I know you're speaking about this piece. I think that's something really important that is happening here too, is you are, I mean, a lot of these textiles are from museums. So they're sort of like a past. You have a very active moment happening where people are literally touching and moving the work, but you're also leaving space for people to dream, because there's like a future aspect on that as well.
And that's the thing, is like, you know, a lot of our work, a lot of our objects as a human species has been looted, pillaged, taken, stolen, moved around, changed spaces, and colonized. And so, you know, the Met's collection, although it may seem at a glance a sort of dirty space to have these sort of more joyful conversations, I want to like revisit sort of these contaminated objects, unarchive them, and bring them back sort of to a place where we can talk about them. So a lot of the process is sort of like, it's almost like a composting process where I'm like, I want to take these different objects and like sit with them and experience them and then put them out there in the world. So here's an example of an object that is embedded in the digital map. It's a palampour. So palampours were these incredibly, they're unique. They were originally unique. They were like whole kingdoms would be commissioning these things. I mean, they were incredibly detailed, made with natural dyes and a very complex resist technique. And again, each one was totally unique. And then through the process of, you know, exchange and consumerism and the marketplace, they eventually became what's commonly known as a chintz. And a chintz is something, if you say something, this is chintzy, it means it's cheap, it's available, it's something you would find at the 50, you know, it's like dollar store type thing. And I just love how, like, we were talking, you know, before about mistranslations, real fakes, and all this stuff. And I'm like, this is totally what I'm into as well. And the sort of marketplace and how that whole story, it's like, it's so complex and it's so rich. So a lot of that stuff, I just want to bring it back and like talk about like, oh, where does this word come from? And how is that actually, you know, like it's a colonial like thing that has happened here. Like, how can we deconstruct that? And how can we go back to the origins and the original meaning of what this object was? And then just consider, not to say one is better or worse necessarily, but just have a conversation about it through time. So here's like a detail of one of the maps, and you can kind of swing through pretty quickly with this.
Sure. And I just want to reiterate again that when you're talking about the educational aspect, well, first of all, one other thing that came up while you were talking is the idea of recontextualizing, of reclaiming stories. I mean, you're sort of going into archives and you're resurrecting these objects, these textiles, and you're not only, I mean, like, you're doing something very interesting, which is you're pushing it into the future with the children, you know, with the education is such a huge part of your practice. And can you speak a little bit about that too? I mean, I know I keep interrupting you, but.
No. Okay, so it took me a really long time because I came to, you know, art practice in the way that a lot of us do through like painting and drawing. And when considering like the Western canon and the sort of individualistic way that we're taught to be artists, it didn't really make sense to me. And I actually struggled for a long time as a painter, feeling very, just not feeling fulfilled. And as soon as I was like, oh, I need to make money actually, and education was just like a skill that was natural to me. And then I started teaching. And so, you know, when I became a public school teacher, so I taught for many years in the Department of Education in New York City, things started cementing together because I was like, oh, this is actually, collaboration is deeply, it's like a very natural state for my work. And so once I started like embracing education as like a part of my artistic toolbox, then I was like, oh, this is so much easier. This is so much more authentic to me. Like, I'm not necessarily that person that is just making paintings for a wall, for the wall. I want to leave space for collaboration and leave potential for conversations and like essentially to like host engagements, you know? So that once I started doing that, then I was like, oh, okay, I feel better.
Yeah. And
So,
I mean, obviously, and maybe not so obviously, so I'll just say this. There is definitely an activist strain that goes through all of your work. But I think the idea that you would just take it on and say, you know what, this is part of my art practice. This is who I am, as opposed to searching for a box to fit yourself in. You just sort of decided that you were going to create your own boundaries around what constitutes your work and your practice. And I've always found that very admirable.
we're gonna go through, just hit the next slide, because actually this goes to who we are and who we love. And you know, a lot of the stuff, like goes back to education too. It's like a lot of times I would be tasked with coming up with lesson plans, and in my lesson plans there's always like these driving ideas. There's like a big idea that you're trying to like get students to understand. And that's kind of with my practice too. I'm like, I think of it as like this great vehicle, this Mahayana style like Buddhist vehicle where everyone can just jump on in. And it really is driven by my love of my family and my love of, you know, the sort kind of like of our stories of everyone's families, and like knowing that we are only transformed through this love. So if you just go through the next slides, you know, my mom's on this chat here, but I lost, I have like no grandparents now. So this is a little homage to my grandparents. If you go back to the first slide, these are my abuelos on the left in New York City. And this is my Japanese family in Japan in 1920. And then if you just go to the next slide, and then this is my Japanese grandmother, and some photos of the internment camps, because the Japanese side was interned in the US. So, you know, that's just a little bit of the sort of very complex history that I'm working with, but also it's really, it's like, you know, we all start making work. I mean, in my case, I started making work really because of my love of my grandmother, and like sitting down with her and, you know, doing origami or, you know, making little animals or doing ikebana. So I always just want to acknowledge that, you know, we are who we are because of our ancestors. So, okay, hit to the next one, because we got 8 minutes. Okay. All right. So also along the lines of, you know, wanting to create portraits, I actually I don't really make portraits, but I wanted to make portraits using objects and also responding to some of the crisis of migration across the US-Mexico border, and just a lot of like very specific urgent experiences. So in this case, this is La Migración, which is just the migration, and it's a way to combine, again, the past, present, and future. So we were listening to, this is 2018, lots of urgent situations happening on the border, and following a couple of journalists who were traveling with people across the border. And I wanted to, from Central America to, you know, the US. And I just, you know, a lot of sort of women, young mothers and children, And this one particular journalist was photographing women and children just laughing also and like being together. And I wanted to sort of highlight like that care and love that happens all the time. And not just like kind of like in this way when you consume news and you're like, oh my God, these people kind of thing. I wanted to humanize that experience. And so I just quickly did a watercolor from one of these photos that this journalist had taken. And I wanted to sort of like create a protection blanket for them. So I went to the Met's collection and I found also, the Dogon figure, it's a woman Dogon figure kneeling. And Dogon people are migratory people. So I thought that their expertise would help to guide them. And then this is an Aztec water goddess just for the protection of ferrying across bodies of water. And so the idea was that I combined all these elements together. This is a collaborator of mine, Shanaz, who I love. And Shanaz and I met at actually one of my other workshops. And we started working together because she does a lot of embroidery and she's helped me a lot with the physical making of a lot of my things. And so the two of us, while we were talking about these experiences, she also brought up she's Greek, and her, the sort of top piece behind the woman's head is actually an embroidery that her grandmother had made. So I combined that image and then we basically stitched and bitched, like we sat down together and we talked about, our grandparents, we talked about our lives, we stitched together and did these little shisha mirrors so that when you're standing in front of the work, it's kind of like, I was thinking about like reflections off a body of water so that you could see sort of like the ripple. And also you can kind of catch glimpses of yourself if you're standing in the right place. And so that's like the most portraiture that I get. And then these are also portraits. I was thinking portraits of mixed race people who kind of straddle all these different spaces. Racial geographies as, is a term that I use, which is basically like that you as a face people are perceiving you in all these different lands, that some of which you've accessed, some of them you haven't accessed, some of you have more knowledge, some of you don't have as much knowledge. So thinking about combining objects from all these disparate places to create portraits. So that's part of the object series. Okay. Swing through. All right, and then so the kind of underlying theme of all my work too is really about highlighting multi-locational storytelling, making sure that there's always multiple voices chiming in, and that's sort of like I swear off like one point perspective. And once I understood and sort of started getting into manuscript paintings, and Persian miniaturist paintings and Indian miniaturist paintings that were actually sites of storytelling. So I was influenced by this idea of a storytelling image that's meant as a place to have all these different scenes happening. So you may look at like a castle and there's like a prince on this side and there's a courtesan talking over here. And there's, so this idea that the architecture is not naive architecture, but it's storytelling architecture, that really stuck to me, along with Bakhtin's sort of philosophical take on the novel, being like, of course, when you read a novel and you hear voices, you hear multiple characters speaking, you don't think of the novel as not a single entity. And yet with people of color and mixed race people, oftentimes we're like seen as divided or somehow we're like not
what can you talk about the idea of 100-100 that you told me about, which was revolutionary for me anyway?
I'm just like, I'm 100-100. We're doubling down. We're double. We're not negative. Like the idea of being a half person.
Yeah.
Always like I still say it sometimes just because it's like colloquially understood to people. But I'm like, I'm not half of a person. I'm like a whole legacy and a whole legacy. I'm not half of a legacy. So anyway, so that's something that has always stuck to me. And I've just been like, okay, well, that's just sort of the underpinning, of it all. I'm like, how do we live as whole people? So just pass through some of these. Yeah, so, and this is a title, it's History Has Failed Us, But No Matter, which is, if anyone hasn't read Pachinko, which is Min Jin Lee's fantastic intergenerational story about, you know, Korean women and Japan is horrible. It's a great story. It's a wonderful story. Yeah, so keep going. And then these are just, so we only have like 2 minutes left. Time goes by fast. And then quickly go through just so I can end up at the end with some work. Okay, great. And then I'll just say that a lot of my work, you know, ends up being real workshops, real educational spaces, and I do a lot of collaborations. And I like to make zines, and I like to make sort of, you know, group collages where everyone's taking things that we're thinking about. Like in this case, we did, everyone brought fabrics and we made these unique quilts, sort of quilt squares, and then told stories with them, and we made a zine from that. Keep going. Yeah. And here's admin. Actually, Nanci and I did one of these admin presentations, workshops, as part of the Honolulu Biennial in 2016, 17, some year. And so again, a lot of collaborations in zine making. And then go to the next, I just want to end on, yeah. And that's Kai, that's my 5, he's now 5, so this is a little bit older, but I did a wonderful residency at the Children's Museum of Manhattan, and it was one of the best residencies because I actually got to bring my, like, sort of my life into it, and like that was a benefit and not a detraction. And so, and I've seen a lot more sort of mother and parent, artist parent oriented residencies, and I just want to acknowledge that that's really important to do, and I hope to see more of that in the art world.
Okay.
I feel like you hit.
So I'm gonna go into well, oh gosh, and then what we haven't even talked about what you're doing right now at Triangle.
Oh, yeah. And just quickly, what I'm doing in the studio right now, which may be a sort of exchange-based project and might end up there, is I've been making all of, in COVID, I think I'm missing people, and I've been making all these sort of vessels that look like humans. To me, they just are like these different unique energetic bodies. And so I'm making them, they're these 9x12 pieces, and I think what is going to happen is I'm gonna make like 100 of them or 400 of them, and then do some kind of exchange-based thing where I give them away and then people bring something to me.
Are you still, so the last time we talked about this, Nati, you actually had people coming in and you were allowing them to make some of their own?
Yes.
Are you still doing that? Is that still part of it?
Yeah, that might happen. I that might be the exchange. Is like I make one and then maybe they pick the one that they want and then they make one to replace it. Mm-hmm. I haven't worked it out. So it's still evolving, but I can tell it's just waiting for participation. I'm just hoping I can figure out what that looks like soon. But luckily, you know, there's a little bit more time.
Yeah.
Okay. Nova's saying we're at time, so.
Oh, we're at time. Okay.
Good.
Okay. Well, I want to kind of look through. Did we?
We'll just put our info in the chat.
Yeah, we'll put our info in the chat.
Thank you all. We're chatty. Sorry. Thank you.
Oh, it was wonderful. Yeah, I invite all of our speakers to turn their cameras back on. Join us. Join the party. Thank you so much, Natalia and Nanci. And I actually feel like all of these conversations could go on for much longer. So this is just a little taste. And I really do encourage anyone who's listening, who's curious, to reach out. All of our artists, I can say, because I've gotten to know them over the last few months, are very friendly and want to hear from you. And our last Zoom Open Studios that we did in the fall, there were some good conversations that came out of that. So I do encourage people to reach out. And yeah, everyone, you know, grab the contact information from the chat. So that concludes our Open Studios evening. Thank you so much to everyone who's joined us, and especially to our guest speakers. It was such a pleasure to share the work that's happening in the Triangle Studios with all of you through this series of such exploratory, incisive, intimate conversations. Thank you all. Have a wonderful evening.
Thank you.